So now, how do we get back to special ed? So first we have Mills versus Board of Education, and the 7 children were denied to go to school, and they basically had to provide that free and appropriate education. So again, the school system lost. They had to do FAPE, free and appropriate education. That means that all students could go to the same school, have the same programs without disabilities, and it also meant that there were some safeguards starting to come in, so that before it was if the school said one thing, the parent automatically lost. And this is the first time that the courts really said, no, parents have a say, students have a say. You know what's right for your children. And if the school isn't providing you with what you need, then you're not doing what is necessary for that child. So again, it came with federal law, and the reason why laws are so important in education is that laws come with money. And this is the first time that special education really was getting funding. Before, people were doing things, but it wasn't necessarily with funds. It was, this teacher's being creative this way, or this district's being creative. And now it's that they really had the money to do what was appropriate. Which leads us to Section 504. Again, it happened in '73, and it really happened as a result of Vietnam. And this was the first time that the American people, almost every American person knew somebody with a disability for the first time. And this is as a result of the soldiers coming back from Vietnam. They're coming back missing limbs. They're coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, although it wasn't identified as that at the time. They were coming back with their faces looking different. And so it was the first time that disabilities were really kind of in everybody's face. Well, what do you need if you have a disability? If you're in a wheelchair, you need things like curb cuts. You may need closed captioning. You may need all of these different things to help you get along. And so Vietnam really was the biggest push for advocacy and getting stuff for people with special needs. All right, so then came the education. So now we know that there were all these adults with disabilities, but now came the outcry. We really need to have education for our students. And so it was the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and it was later renamed as IDEA. So here's the rationale. You can take a second to read it. It's basically that you have the free and appropriate education, you're protecting student rights, you're protecting the local education agency, which stands for LEA, Local Education Agency, really stands for the schools themselves. And then access to assure that the students were being educated. All right, so these are all the different reauthorizations. Everyone knows PL 94-142, but basically it's the same law and they just keep doing some revisions to it. You can see that autism and TBI were added, ADHD was not. In the 90s, and then 2004, of course, it was reauthorized again. So the shift has really changed. It used to be that we were opening doors, we were letting students come in, but now it's really that we're getting those evidence-based practices, it's that we're getting those higher expectations. It's no longer enough to have them sitting in the classroom. They have to be meeting those high standards, and that's being judged or determined by those state testing. So everyone now is basically doing the same state testing to see what has been achieved. So here's IDEA. The purpose is the structures, the provisions, and the connections to general ed. This is what we're going to be going over next. So there's 4 parts. The part A is basically all of the definitions. It really doesn't have a lot of meat other than giving you all those basics. So when I pulled up those definitions earlier in this presentation, they're all from Part A of IDEA. Part B is basically what is going to be the foundation of everything that you're going to do. It's children ages 3 through 21. It's all the disabilities. This is where the funding comes. So you're going to talk about and hear about IDEA Part B, IDEA Part B. Part C, for those of you who are early childhood majors, you may talk about Part C. That's the infants to 3. But basically for us, especially in the secondary class, we're going to be talking about Part B. And then Part D is the capacity. It's the LEAs, local education agencies, and SEAs, state education agencies, again, meaning the schools, the districts, and the state education. All right. So again, Part A, which is the terms, the definitions part, this is where all of these definitions come in. So what the categories are, what the functions are. FAPE, again, means free and appropriate education. How we're going to deal with these things. What do we do if there's a ward of the state? What do we do when a parent gets involved? All of that is spelled out in Part A. So it's also interesting that they put it this way, that a disability alone in no way diminishes the right of an individual to participate in or contribute to society. So that is saying right there that that person with a disability can vote, that a person can partake in various different things. If they're, if they can meet the requirements, they can go into the military. Anything that you are guaranteed a right of, a person with a disability is guaranteed that right, and that's all part of Part A. All right, so now the other part of Part A that's really important to you is this research-based practice. And this is what we're going to discuss in class, because when you go and you're going to do your project in here, that change over time project, you must use a research-based practice. And the reason why is that in your class you need to use all research-based practices. You can't just pick something up and say, oh, I really want to try this because it sounds great. Because if it doesn't work, or if it has a negative effect size, well, you personally, in addition to your school, are going to be held accountable. So if you don't use research-based practices, the parents can actually sue you and for not teaching their children the way that the research says they should be taught. Sorry. All right. So here's the 8 solutions IDEA can be more effective with these things. And so as you read through these, you're going to see some things that are pretty common. We always talk about how we're going to access the general education curriculum and standards. We talk about constantly how do we get parents more involved, that we need to coordinate IDEA and NCLB and provide those supports. You also know that in your pre-service preparation that you're all getting content certified in addition to special ed, whether that be elementary or whether it be social studies, science, math, whatever it happens to be. And this is because of IDEA requires you to be a highly qualified teacher. The incentives for whole school reforms, this is where they're doing the PBIS, positive behavior support interventions, reduced paperwork. That's where the IEPs, a lot of states have streamlined IEPs now. And then, of course, development of technology. You're seeing a lot more one-to-one computers. You're seeing, as the technology is really growing, that it is being integrated into schools more and more. So what is the purpose of IDEA 2004? And I'll just let you read these. I'm not going to read them to you. There's 2 on each slide. So if you need a little bit more time to flip through them, just pause the video, read them, and then come back. All right. So you've read through the different reasons why, but now here's basic summary of it. You're going to ensure all the things that we just keep talking about, the FAPE, the student rights, the SEA and LEAs, the getting coordination of early intervention services, making sure technology is integrated, and of course to make sure that services are effective. All right, so now IDEA has 6 principles derived from its goals, and most of these you're probably familiar with. But let's just take a minute and go over them very quickly. So 0 reject, it doesn't matter what your ability or disability is. As a school district, as a school, we are to provide you with an education. Same thing with non-discriminatory evaluation, that we want to evaluate you to the best of our abilities to provide you with an appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. Now, if you as the student or the parent or the teacher feels that we are not providing it, you have a right to due process. And parent participation is not only encouraged, it's really mandated, especially in that IEP process. All right, so how do we connect all of this back to NCLB? Well, let's start with what NCLB is all about. So first of all, NCLB, No Child Left Behind, and this came out of the national government as well. And originally we were really concerned because NCLB was making it that students with disabilities, especially those with cognitive disabilities, we're going to bring down schools. Schools were going to not be able to be passing schools because of students with disabilities. But we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So here are the major principles of NCLB and the major principles of IDEA. And when you look at them, there really are a lot more in coordination than one might have initially thought. For example, the zero reject. Well, that's principle of high accountability as well. So that the high accountability, students have to be in these classes and they need to maintain. Parent involvement on both sides, procedural due process with principle of local flexibility. So how are we going to make it so that it works? Non-discriminatory evaluation versus what the parent participation and choice. The idea that there is scientifically based intervention, that research-based practice. So believe it or not, there's actually a lot of things between NCLB and IDEA that actually correlate together. Now, when we're in class, you're going to actually be making a Venn diagram comparing NCLB and IDEA. So I suggest that this is something you may want to take notes on, you may want to look at a little bit more, or even have this slide pulled up when we do this in class. All right, so here are some things about how this influences your future teaching roles. And I'll again, take your time to read it, pause the video if necessary. In the future, I won't have so much text on these PowerPoints. It's just that with the laws, it's easier sometimes to have you read the material than to just have me read it to you.